Hey horror fans, welcome back to Room 237, coming at you with another, I guess, sort of random horror movie review. And this time I'm doing the absolute classic Fright Night from 1985. This is a movie, I remember seeing this cover in the video store when I was a kid. And of course AMC always does their Halloween marathons in October. And they would always show this clip when Bearse turns into that on like ads on TV. I don't know how old I was when I first saw it. I know I was in elementary school. I was very young, and I always liked it. And this is the first time I've seen it in years. I bought this way back in high school, and then there was like a handful of movies that I got rid of back in like 2011 because I wanted to get more graphic horror films, like foreign ones. And sadly, this was one of them. I picked this up recently for very cheap, and I always regretted getting rid of it. I don't know why I did. It wasn't for lack of liking it or anything. But Fright Night, it is a classic. It came out in 1985, which was a killer year for horror films. Besides this, you had Reanimator, one of my top 10 favorite movies of all time. Return of the Living Dead, which is up there also. What else did you have in 85? Of course you had sequels that year also. And pretty much, of course, this was remade 2011, which will be my next review. I've never seen it. I've never seen the remake for this. I never cared to, but I'm going to give it a go. The cool thing about this, though, is it's basically... Well, it was directed by Tom Holland, who, of course, would go on to do the original Child's Play. And no, that's not Spider-Man Tom Holland, obviously. Has a good cast. Our lead is a William Ragsdale. You have Chris Sarandon, who... I never realized how versatile Chris Sarandon is as an actor. He plays a good vampire in this, like a charming, charismatic guy who's also a vampire. Of course, he's the voice of Jack Skellington. He's the detective in Child's Play. He was a transvestite in Dog Day Afternoon, which is a fantastic... It's not a horror movie, but it's a fantastic movie. Probably my favorite Pacino film next to Godfather 2. And also Amanda Bearse, which Married with Children is my favorite sitcom, so seeing Marcy as something other than Marcy is pretty neat. I got a wicked itch. God damn it. Anyway, you also have Stephen Geoffreys, who plays one of my favorite characters in an 80s horror film. He plays Evil Ed. And you have the late, great Roddy McDowell. I'm a big Roddy McDowell fan. I'm a huge Planet of the Apes geek. And I always love seeing Roddy McDowell. Every time I see him, he has one of those voices. He has a great voice. I always think of him as either Cornelius or Caesar. There's an old Twilight Zone episode he was into where he was really good. Roddy McDowell's a great actor. And it's basically Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window, but with vampires, which is very interesting. William Ragsdale plays Charley Brewster, horror movie fan. He's been dating Amanda Bearse's character, Amy, for around a year. They're making out in his bedroom, and, they're about to have sex for the first time, and he notices someone's moving in next door, and they're carrying in a coffin. And that's the first scene of the movie. 108 minutes, not a bad length, but the first scene, we see them carrying a coffin inside the house. This movie doesn't waste time, jumps right into it, very well paced. And so, he starts thinking, that's kind of weird. Then he comes home from school. And there's this blonde woman asking, is this 99 whatever street? And he's like, no, that's next door. So then the next day, sees on the news that she's been killed. She's been found. And it's the second woman in 2 days. So now he's putting it together, it's my neighbor. And he sits up one night to watch him through the window. Sees him with this naked girl. It's kind of erotic. And then he sees fangs. And for me, the creepiest scene is in that, because just as he's about to go bite her, he kind of looks up. And it's just, there's not really any music, not that I really remember, but just like, watching someone and then knowing that they saw you. It was very, very well done scene. That's upside down. And so Charley Brewster's kind of obsessed with proving that his neighbor, Jerry Dandridge, is a vampire. Causes friction with him and his girlfriend. And I don't know if they're best friends or if they're just friends, but Stephen Geoffreys plays this kid named Evil Ed, who he's, this spiky-haired, very eccentric, he's always laughing, kid obsessed with horror movies and the occult. It basically, Evil Ed is who I was in high school. And, it's Charlie trying to prove to everyone he's a vampire. And Chris Sarandon, playing Jerry Dandridge, pretty much giving him threats. He even comes into his house, sort of beats him up, gives him the option of, forget about me, I'll forget about you. Of course he doesn't. And Roddy McDowell plays this sort of Vincent Price type character. He's the host of this horror show, because in the 80s you had like Elvira and can't remember some of the other ones. There were a few like horror hosts. Was Monster Vision around in the 80s, or was that 90s with Joe Bob Briggs? But anyway, he plays this guy named Peter Vincent, who's the great vampire killer, and he sort of does like, it's sort of like Hammer films, like the sort of Hammer era of horror films, which actually there's a scene where he's watching a Christopher Lee film. So Charlie thinks, if he goes to him, he can get help killing this vampire, except Peter Vincent's a bad actor. He's, it's just a character. He doesn't really believe in vampires and any of that. He's actually, and it's funny because Roddy McDowell is a fantastic actor, and he's playing a bad actor, and I think he does it well. They gave him some makeup, put some gray in his hair, and he kind of looked like Peter Cushing, actually. And there's this guy, Jonathan Stark. I can't remember what else he was in. He kind of looks like Gary Cole, which is funny because his character's name is Billy Cole. He's sort of the Renfield character. He's like Jerry Dandridge's assistant. He takes care of stuff like around the daytime and whatever. And I mean, without giving too much away, but most horror fans, this is definitely a good one to first get into. You look up 80s classics, this one's always up there. In fact, I think this was considered a sleeper hit, because around this time there was, because this is Columbia, I guess there was a film called Perfect with John Travolta and Jamie Lee Curtis that was like a projected blockbuster hit. So Columbia was more interested in that, and they never came to the set of this. Tom Holland had complete control, no interference with the studio. And you kind of get that feeling with this. It feels very laid back. It really feels like, everyone was really into it. I guess there's like really no friction. I guess the only real problem that I know of during making this was, I guess now I can get into the effects. The effects are done by Richard Edlund, who had just gotten off of Ghostbusters, which is awesome. But he had also done Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, Poltergeist, which is another one of my favorite films. So the guy knows how to do effects. And Ghostbusters had kind of a big budget. And Fright Night had a much smaller budget. So, Edlund and his crew really knew how to do these great effects on a small budget. And the effects in this are phenomenal. I mean, yeah, there's some matte paintings and optical illusions that might not hold up 100%, but they still look decent. But the practical effects, I mean, when Amanda Bearse turns into this vampire, Jerry Dandridge's sort of more or less final form, like that. The effects of Evil Ed when he turns. In fact, there's a scene where Evil Ed turns into a werewolf. Which, I mean, it's a wolf, but then when he gets killed, we get like American Werewolf in London transformation, but in a reverse. It may not be as good as American Werewolf in London, but it's still very well done. And all the animatronics in this, like when Jerry is a bat at the end, or some of the werewolf effects, those animatronics look beautiful. I mean, they're ugly, hideous creatures, but the effects are just... It's another thing, because I know the remake has a lot of CGI. It's what I'm sort of gearing myself up for. I know it has CGI. You can't get... I can't remember who it was that said it originally, but Rambo Rat for Life says it a lot too. You can't get realer than real. Realer's not a word, but you can't get realer than real. And this is one of those movies from the 80s, like Chuck Russell's The Blob, Reanimator, John Carpenter's The Thing, above all, where as awesome, just amazing practical effects that Hollywood is just so stupid for not using that anymore. And there's amazing artists out there that can do this shit, but no, they'd rather do CGI. This movie is kind of a slow burn. I mean, even though it jumps right into the plot right off the bat, it really is a slow build-up. And you don't really get a lot of the effects or the horror or the action as much until the end, but it is very worth it. The whole third act is, it's well worth the wait, but even though it's slow, it's still amusing. Great, you have a good cast, you have great characters. Charley Brewster, he's a guy you root for. I mean, when the film opens up, it also has kind of like a 50s aesthetic, because like there's a restaurant they go to. It kind of reminds me of Jackrabbit Slims from, is that what it's called in Pulp Fiction? Having a brain fart. It's a very 50s kind of sock hop looking restaurant. And also the first scene where Charlie talks to his mom, there's a lot of, oh, gee, ma, but once it really gets into the story, everyone acts their part very well. You do get some interesting shots. Like, there's this one shot where Jerry knows Charlie's watching, and there's this crazy zoom straight in on his window. Some optical effects on the curtains, but it's a nice, swooshing zoom. I've always loved the scene where Ed's turned and he's in the back of their car and he's pointing and laughing as the car drives off. Actually, when they're running away from Jerry, they try to escape through a nightclub. And one of the bouncers was one of the bikers from Friday the 13th Part 3. This is just a fun movie. It's not as much a comedy as, say, Return of the Living Dead or Reanimator, but it is just as fun. And, the Motion Picture Guide says an outstanding horror film. And I agree. In the 80s, yeah, it was all slasher films, which that's actually a joke in this. When Charlie first goes to meet Peter Vincent to ask him for help, we find out his show has been canceled for low ratings. And he makes the comment well, I wish more people believed in vampires. But no, all kids want to see are killers in ski masks killing young virgins. Which is true. Outside the slasher genre, you didn't really get too many other horror films. But, you know, I'm a big fan of the Universal era horror film. And Dracula is one of my favorites. And this is like a good modernized tale of Dracula. I mean, you have the vampire, you have the Renfield, you have the sort of love for Amanda Bearse because he has paintings from back in his time of a woman that looks just like her, so you sort of have like that lust for like this sort of woman that looks just like someone from his time, but set in, you know, just regular working class suburbia, like it's one of those any neighborhood settings, kind of like Halloween, that works so well. And I haven't seen this for a long time. I just got done rewatching it, and this is one of my favorite vampire films. I mean, Dracula and Nosferatu will always be my top two. To me, those are vampires. But this is up there. I haven't seen The Lost Boys in fucking years. I think I was in junior high and I saw it on cable. I never picked it up. And one thing I kind of accepted rewatching this is because I know in the remake there's Colin Farrell and he's sparkly. Came out in the midst of the Twilight hype. But when I really think about it, I guess there's always been some sort of like eroticism with vampires. I mean, maybe not Nosferatu. There was lust in Dracula and romance, like gothic romance. Bela Lugosi wasn't the most handsome of men. But, you know, in traditional vampire tales, yeah, there's always been like either an erotic or at the very least a romantic side to vampires. That being said, there is a fucking limit. And I would say Chris Sarandon is the limit. Yeah, he's handsome, charming, especially the scene where, you know, he's invited in by Charlie's mother. You know, he's got this charm and everything. But he's not all sparkly. He's not Twilight. That's taking it too far, if you ask me. But I still think this was very well done. And also, I would consider this to be this might sound weird, but a classy horror film. There's a lot of class to this that I think a lot of people might not notice. I mean, yeah, it's rated R. What horror movie in the 80s isn't? It's either PG or R. It's kind of weird. But, you know, there's like one scene of nudity, and it's not gratuitous. You know, you get why the nudity's there. It's supposed to be like a romantic scene, even though it's creepy, because that's when Charlie first finds out Jerry's vampire. There's not a whole lot of swearing. You know, you hear shit a couple times. I think they only say fuck once or twice. The gore, it's not very gory. I mean, when the Billy Cole, the Renfield-esque character gets killed, yeah, there's a lot of slime. It's kind of gross, but very well done effect. You know, he totally melts and disintegrates. Looks beautiful. Also, like when he's a skeleton, he falls back on the stairs. Bones go everywhere. Get this great slide shot of the skull sliding on the floor, hitting something. But yeah, you know, it's not like, you know, people getting stabbed in the face with something. You know, I just feel like this movie has a lot of class. Just, it's a very entertaining, well-paced, just fun vampire flick. Didn't need to be remade, but we'll get into that. So yeah, Fright Night, it's a fucking classic. As far as 80s films go, outside the slasher genre, it's one of the top ones for me. I mean, next to Reanimator, Return. I know my friend Hellhound over at Horror Metal, he considers Fright Night, Reanimator, and Return of the Living Dead as the holy trinity of, I can't remember what he says, I think at least 80s horror films. Which for me, yeah, it's pretty close. At least Reanimator and Return of the Living Dead. I would throw Evil Dead 2 in there. That's my trifecta. But Fright Night is still very, very fun, very entertaining, and it's a great fucking movie. So with that, from Room 237, thank you all for watching.